What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 650. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how's your week been so far? It's only Tuesday, I guess, but...
Oh, it's been good. I have a newfound respect for you after taking over the reins of the show last week. And by that, I mean, it was really easy, way easier than my job. So I guess I'm glad to be back in the hot seat.
That's not what newfound respect means.
Okay, my level of respect has changed. Let's just put it that way.
Oh my God. I see. So you found a new lower level of respect. That's so brutal. Well,
Let's
that was
say
fun,
you're the
though.
CP3 of podcast hosts.
Oh my God, that is so uncalled for. I'm going to tell Paul you said that. Yeah, the point God. That was ended up being really fun last week to do the personal stuff on the show. We don't do it very often, right? We kind of view the show and our viewers as people coming here to learn how to get better at Limited, improve their game. And so we don't indulge ourselves too often. But when we do, it tends to go over quite well, and it did this time too. So thanks for all the nice words from everybody for that. We're back to business though this week. We're going to cover a couple of things. We're going to talk about one of the archetypes that we haven't talked about yet in the format, and we're going to go deep on that. And it probably isn't exactly how you think it's going to go. And then we're also going to talk about the format as a whole. Luis and I were chatting before the show, and we both realized that we both kind of have a lot to say about where the format's at and how it works and how we feel about it, even though it's very early, by set standards at least. But we're like, no, let's talk about this on the show. Like we've got a lot to say. And I was kind of pressing Luis and stuff, and we're going to get into the nitty gritty about what's going on with Streets of New Capenna in broad strokes before we get into the more specific archetype we're going to talk about. That said, let's talk about our sponsors, channelfireball.com. Make sure you check them out for anything you need magical. You can also get stuff for other games too, by the way. I don't know how much of our audience plays games like Pokemon or Flesh and Blood. But if you do, they carry that stuff at Channel Fireball as well. If you head over, you can find the Channel Fireball Marketplace, and this is where you can pick up all the stuff that you used to be able to get just from CFB. Now you can get from their network of stores, and that means that it allows you to comparison shop, right? I mean, who isn't looking for a good deal? And there's kind of a whole bunch of different factors that you can factor in about, how quickly it might get to you, the condition of it, the price of it, how much you've worked with that store before, you trust them to take care of you, all of that kind of stuff. And it's all right there in front of you where you can pick what suits you the best. And that's the best of all worlds for you over the Channel Fireball Marketplace. While you're there, there's also CFB Pro. If you're looking to improve your game, which you probably are if you're listening to this podcast, CFB Pro offers articles and content from some of the best Magic players around who are deadly focused on getting you better at the format, deck, approach, whatever it is that you want to get better at. You're going to find content on CFB Pro for that. If you do end up pick up anything at CFB, if you use the affiliate code LR at checkout, it's just a little field that you fill in. You just put the 2 letters LR in there. It helps out the show, and we do appreciate it. Thanks for doing so. Show's also brought to you by FTX. That's the safe, regulated place to manage your digital assets. If you're looking to do some digital asset management, buying, selling, trading, etc., you're going to need a place to do it. And that means that you're going to want to visit an exchange. And an exchange, in this sense, is just a place that you can go to look at how much you've got, what it's doing, going up, down, if you want to sell it, trade it, buy some more. And FTX is the place to go for that. They're the place, the one that's been the most regulated, the most safe. For US customers, it's ftx.us. For outside the US, it's ftx.com. And there's an app for your phone as well as a website, and you can go check it out. We always recommend making sure that you educate yourself on any type of investment or anything like that ahead of time. And it's worth noting that, Luis and I are not investment professionals. We can't really offer you advice as far as that goes. What we can say is when you feel ready, when you've talked to the professional and you know that it's your time to jump in, FTX is the place to go, and we recommend checking them out. Of course, the show is also brought to you by you via the Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources. If you'd like to just support the show directly, if you like what we do here, if you feel that we've helped you out, with winning some more games or brightening up your week, that's the place to go to say thanks and to show your appreciation at Patreon. We've got a question for our Patreon question of the week. This is a thread that I put up every few months and then refresh it, where you get to throw your questions in about anything you want, and we'll grab one for it for each show. This one comes from Win, who says, "Hey guys, love the show. It's fair to say it's the reason I play Magic." Oh, that's awesome. Even when playing casual formats, I never take back misplays in the hope that it will force me to remember them so I become a better player. Before I read Win's actual question here, Luis, what do you think about that policy? That's an interesting take, because I think there's two approaches. There's that one where you say, look, I'm trying to get better myself, so I'm going to not take them back. But then also, do you let your opponents take them back if it's, if you're at an F&M and it's not, nothing super high stakes, and they go, oh, I actually just didn't mean to play this land. Can I play this other one? Do you hold your opponents to that same level as well? What's your take on that?
It really depends on the context. I don't play F&M that often, but I do play pre-releases. And at pre-releases, I let my opponents take stuff back. They attack with a 2/2, and I've got like a 2. They attack with a 2/2 flyer. I'm like, oh, this 2/3's got reach. Do you want to attack? And like, if they don't want to, I'm totally fine with that. I'm not really looking to crush my opponents at the pre-release. Insofar as do I try to take back my own mistakes? No, I generally don't. I don't find it to be something that I'm really interested in. Like, if I'm testing, sometimes we will. Like if I'm testing against a teammate, and in paper in arena you can't even take back mistakes, so it's whatever. But and if you're trying to test and just actually find out like which deck is better, then yes, we'll often like take back mistakes, because like we're not trying to figure out which player is better or who's going to make a mistake to win. We're trying to get the best data we can on that. Right. But yeah, when it's a casual environment, I think just kind of play it so people are having fun. That's generally how I tend to approach it. Yeah, and I agree. And when I think it's totally fine to hold yourself to that standard, I do the same thing. And then when other people ask for a take back, I usually just view it in the context that it's in. For starters, like Louis said, if it's a pre-release, I'm almost always just going to say yes. But also that there are different types of take backs, right? There are definitely like, oh, I played this land. Can I play this other land? Yeah, no problem. I want to attack. Oh, actually, no, I want to attack. Yeah, no problem. Right. Stuff like that, where they clearly didn't understand what they were doing. But then there's some where it's like, well, we can't rewind like 7 game actions here for you to go back. Like it's just a little too late. That does happen sometimes too. At any rate, Win says, what have been your worst or most memorable misplays, and what strategies do you employ to avoid making the same mistakes again? Well, I've made a lot of misplays because I've played a lot of Magic. Like one of the things I like to tell people is I've lost more matches of Magic than almost anyone because I've played so many. One that kind of is, I guess, somewhat recent as far as these things go is from a couple years ago at the Pro Tour in London. I was playing as Reed Duke it was either the last round or second to last round. I think it was the last round though. And we were playing for top 8. We were playing for like top 32 though, and I wanted to win. Certainly, I was playing a hardened scales, and he was playing Jund, of course, in modern. And I go for the win, but he ends up. I ended up being 1 point short because of his Scavenging Ooze, and it wasn't like he had a card I didn't know. Like he had a removal spell, but I had kind of baked in he's going to have one removal spell. Yeah, and I basically just miscounted. Like I just didn't realize like. What I didn't factor in, I think, was that the removal spell would also put an extra creature in the graveyard for Scavenging Ooze. Oh, sure, yeah. So I ended up in a spot where I was 1 point short, and he killed me on his turn. I did ask him, because Reed's a friend and a teammate. I asked, like, this is game 3, like, hey, what did you have something in your hand, or what was your top card? And he had another removal spell on top of his deck, so I was going to lose even if I didn't go for it, because I was at really low life total. But I still remember that, and I guess the biggest thing there is like, really make sure that you've done the math right and you've factored in everything that you're trying to figure out, because this wasn't like, it was complicated insofar as Hardened Scales is a complicated deck, and it's kind of hard to like I was doing Arcbound Ravager or Walking Ballista. That's one of the hardest decks to play. Yeah, I would never touch that deck. But I also like didn't put together that, yes, I was assuming he had a removal spell because otherwise he was super dead. But if he had the removal spell, he also gained an extra life, and that, like, I kind of missed that interaction. And so just trying to take your time when you need to, because I play really fast. It's not something like it's not like I run out of time to make my plays in general. I could have afforded to take a little bit more time in this particular instance, and I guess I wish I did.
Yeah, for me, one thing that I find really fascinating about these discussions, and I noticed this when I first started doing Pro Tour coverage, was the definition of a punt or a mistake and how it changes based on the audience, right? Your version of a punt, right, is like you already were playing around the fact that that Reed could or should have a removal spell in hand, right? Like that already puts you in a category where like most people wouldn't consider that a punt, because they're like, well, they had the removal spell, so what was I supposed to do or whatever?
Sure,
right?
Yeah.
And when you hear a pro say I punted it all away, it's usually something that the average player may not even notice. Like they may not even have factored in,
or punted it all away by playing the wrong land 3 turns ago.
Exactly. Like, and I'm so stupid, and how could I do that? And so to me, there's two sort of categories of punts, right? There's the type that happen because there was known information and you miscalculated. Like you just said, oh, well, this didn't work out how I thought it would because I thought I was going to kill them, like similar to what you're describing. And then there's the ones that are judgment calls, right? Where like you have to make a fairly close call about like, do I attack with my creatures here or do I not? And neither of them are outright game losers, but one of them is advantageous over the other. And you only realize it in retrospect that no, the proper line, not just knowing what I know now and being results oriented, but holistically speaking, the proper line was to sit back. And those to me are the ones that are, a tougher pill to swallow, right? Because I don't know, it feels like if you make a mistake on board, it is a dumb mistake, but at the same time, it's like, that's very solvable. For me, it's interesting because I want to bring up one. I have countless mistakes, of course, to choose from. But having never really played like super high stakes Magic, right? I've played for, potentially for GP top 8s a few times, but not PT level even. Some of the I am reminded of a mistake that's sort of a reverse. So I was playing in a PTQ, and this was after Modern first came out, and I was playing Rug Delver, which was my favorite deck. And I was playing against a Primeval Titan Valakut deck. And my opponent played a land and then played Primeval Titan. But what I failed to recognize was that my opponent had played Evolving Wilds and tapped it for mana to play the Primeval Titan. And so this is kind of this is on me. Like, obviously it's on my opponent, right? Like that was their mistake. But also like what ended up happening was that happened. I went to my turn. I drew a card. I think I killed the Primeval Titan. And then I was like, wait a minute. Why is there a tapped Evolving Wilds? And my opponent was like, I'm like, you didn't search that up. With like, you got these other 2 lands with the Primeval Titan, and they're like, so we're like, okay, let's call a judge. And what ended up happening was the judge was like, well, now we've taken too many game actions. So basically like, sorry, like it just has to stand. And so, I attacked with my creature, sent it back. The player just cracked the Evolving Wilds and killed me, right? Because now they had an extra mountain landfall from the other 2 Valakuts that they had searched up.
Adding insult to injury,
right? And I died.
To insult, even,
right? But but it's interesting to me because obviously that wasn't fair or right or whatever. But had I been paying more attention, right, I could have gone, hey, hold on a second. That's an Evolving Wilds. You just tapped it for mana. Let's call the judge and get this sorted out before you go searching, right? Before you shuffle your library, before you even pick up your library, let's call the judge and figure out what we're supposed to do here. And I think that what that shows isn't that it was me who made the mistake. It was my opponent who made the mistake. But the mentality of the players who I really respect, and the mentality that I try to have in Magic and in life, is self-reliance. I look at myself here and I go, what could I have done differently? right? Not to blame myself for it. Again, this does fall on my opponent, but if I had been paying more attention to what they were doing, I could have sorted it out and I could have stopped it. And again, that isn't a way of assigning blame. It's a way of saying, what could I take away from this? How could I have learned from this? Is there anything that I could have done on my side? And I think a lot of players would have got up and said, of course there wasn't. This person effectively cheated, like even if it wasn't on purpose, and I got screwed, right? And like, I walked away going, was there something that I could have done? Because I'm trying to control the things that I can control. And in this case, there was. If I had been paying more attention, I could have caught it and I would have done it. And I think that that's a fine mentality to have when you approach this stuff. And I want to thank you for the question. Okay, let's do our Crack-A-Pack. I've got one here. We don't have producer Jeff with us today. And now, of course, I have lost. There it is. Okay. The first card out is Attended Socialite. That's the one in a green 2/1. And it has Alliance. It gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Not a fan.
No, it's just basically what we said in the set review, which is 2/1 going to 3/2 doesn't really change the combat math at all of like what this trades with, what this gets by. So mediocre card to be sure.
Also, they really honestly burned the flavor text, say hello to my little friend on this.
Yeah, that's bad.
Like, come on, man. You couldn't, at any rate. Crooked Custodian is next. That's the one in a black 3/2 that ETB's tapped.
I've liked this card. I mean,
I have not, but when people play it, I'm like, okay, that's a card.
I'm not saying it's a great card. I'm not certainly can't really even construct a pack like I did last week, for example, where I would take Crooked Custodian first pick. But it's a card that you got to play something on turn 2, and Attended Socialite gets dinged because the green and especially green white have better options at 2-drop. Black kind of doesn't have that many options, so I'm a little more into the Custodian. And
there's also like a huge component here, which is that Custodian defensively trades up quite consistently, and the Socialite does not. It effectively only triggers on your turn under most circumstances. Revelation of Power is next. This is the 1 in a white instant that gives a creature +2/+2. And if it has a counter on it, it gets flying and lifelink too.
Yeah, I like this well enough. Like I end up playing it. It's what it mostly competes with in the blue-white decks is Majestic Metamorphosis, the spell that makes one of your things into an angel. And that one wins usually. But this is still a good card if you don't have other tricks.
Yeah, this is a totally serviceable combat trick. Gilded Pinions is next. This is the 2-mana equipment that gives a creature flying for equip 2, and when it ATBs, you make a treasure. I have not been playing this card. People do play it against me occasionally, and it is one of those cards that can win a game that wouldn't have otherwise be won. But this is a perfect example of a card. If you put it on the quadrant theory, it just flops. It's really bad unless you're in a winnable or nearly winnable scenario, and in all the other ones it just stinks.
Yeah, it's the sort of card that would be better if like red-green decks were better. I think it is a big part of it. And
definitely.
And that's really where it hurts. Even though these flying equipment cards are the kind of cards that if you're ahead can really put like the screws to your opponent, because now all of your creatures are must kills and they're hard to block. But I just don't think it plays out that way to make this card good, though it's actually a pretty good version of this card.
It really is. And like you said, the red-green decks also often want ramp, and this does provide you with turn 2 ramp, even if it is a one-shot. But yeah, there's no home for it. Botanical Plaza, that's the green-white duel. I'm interested. Civic Gardener, the enemy of the Attended Socialite. This is the 1 in a green 2/2. When it attacks, you can untap a creature or land. That's a pretty actually functional little ability. It comes up a lot more than I thought it would. I kind of figured it would be like give this or something else vigilance, but there's a lot of times where you play this on 2 and then you play a tap land on 3 and then untap the tap land and still get to play a 3-drop.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the best use cases for it. And this card has been a little better than I expected it to be.
Me too. There's a line for me on the, we'll call them the brokers 2-drops, right? And this one's above it, but barely, where Attended Socialite's below it. This next card's been pretty good too. Echo Inspector, 3 in a blue, 2/3 flying with connive when it ETBs.
Yeah, I like this a lot. It's frequently a 3/4 flyer, which is just incredibly burly, and even if it's not, it's probably helping your you exchange a land for a spell, which is something you need when you're flooded.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've realized over time how much better it is as a 3/4. Like every single time my opponent plays this, I find myself hoping that they discard a land, which is the opposite of what I think I would hope for. I think I would be like, if they discarded a spell, I think I would be happy because my opponent would be giving up, a full spell from their hand for just a +1/+1 counter on a creature at the moment. But that has not been the case. Every time they do a 3/4, I'm like, oh man, now I can't kill that thing. Now it's so much better in combat. It's going to kill me. So I actually do look to discard spells to it when I can. I'm kind of looking for an excuse to do so because it's just so much better as 3/4 flyer.
I mean, kind of to go back to the discussion on different like important levels of stats. Rafine's Informant, the 2/1 connive. I'll discard a spell to it if I have the ability to, but I don't really worry too much because a 2/1 and a 3/2 are often kind of trading for the same things, dying to the same things.
Right.
A 2/3 and a 3/4 are very dramatically different.
Right.
Like that one matters a lot more. You get out of strangle range, for example.
You get out of strangle and deal gone bad range. Like those are two.
Calling a professional, all those things.
Calling a professional. I mean, geez, that's two commons and an uncommon that see heavy play, and it dodges all of those by getting the extra counter.
So that's one that I have more often discarded a spell even when it's kind of painful to do that, as opposed to the Informant where I'm just discarding lands all the time to that one. Yeah.
Also, the 3/4 matches up well against cards like Attended Socialite with the Pump or Crooked Custodian or Jewel Thief or any number of, 3-powered creatures. Echo Inspector's been good. Skybridge Towers. Wow, we got both of the brokers duels here. So this is the blue-white dual land.
I would rather take the blue-white than the green-white one. I found blue-white to be better, but
okay.
I'm still hoping not to do that. I mean, and I would also just take Echo Inspector over either land.
Okay. Broken Wings is next. I haven't been playing it because I've been playing Best of One. Yeah. Incriminate. You want to say anything about Incriminate? Do you want to incriminate?
I actually have a right not to incriminate myself.
I was going to say you want to plead the fifth. Uncommons, Rafine's Silencer. I do like this card. 2 and a black, 1/1 with Connive. And when it dies, a creature an opponent controls gets -X until on a turn where X is its power.
I've found this card to be pretty good in the kind of blue, black, red control decks or sack decks. I would still take Echo Inspector over it. I think I'd rather just start with a blue card than a black card. I think this format does lend itself to that. But the Silencer is definitely high on my list of cards I'd be interested in.
Yeah, I think one way to frame what you're saying here, right, is like blue can go into Brokers or Maestros, right, which is those are the two places I end up most often, and Silencer can only go into one of those.
I think you're underrating Obscura a little bit. I think you might want to try to spread your wings a bit because I think Obscura is fine.
Yeah, so I also think it's fine, but I also don't end up there as often. I think that part of the reason for that is what you just said about blue-white. I find myself in white-green more. I'm not saying that I think it's better. I just feel that by the time like my colors settle down, I'm usually more on the like civil servant end of things. I don't know why. But I'll try to push to be a little more towards blue-white because that does seem really powerful. And that would put me into Obscura more often as well. Maestro's Charm is next. It's fine. Maestro's Charm, these charms I think always must be graded on whether they can generate you card advantage or not. And this is in the not camp, but it's fine, right? It's a good 1-for-1 kind of across the board. So you can play it. Would you take it?
Mm-hmm. You just should not start with a 3-color card in this format. We're going to get to that in the format discussion, but like that's actually, I think, a failing of the format. Like I'm not saying that, the format lives or dies of whether you could take Maestro's Charm over Echo Inspector, but it is crazy to take a 3-color card over even a decent 1-color card. Despite this being a 3-color set, you just should not do that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few, like I'll take a Lagrella, like I'll push hard for the high
Disciplined
upside.
Duelist is fantastic.
Right, but not Maestro's Charm. Brazen Upstart, solid card. This is the red, green, white 4/2 with Vigilance, and when it dies, you can look at the top 5 cards of your library and you can reveal a creature card from among them and put it in your hand. The rest go on the bottom in any order.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, this is one of the few Cabaretti cards that I'm interested in playing, mostly in my like white-green decks is what I found.
Yeah, me too. But it does have a significant downside with just the 2 toughness, is that it almost always trades off for a 2-drop and then you get a card back, and that's a reasonable exchange, but it is remarkably consistent at doing that exact, like it rarely trades up. Our rare is another land. It's Spara's Headquarters. This is the Broker's Tri-land. ETB's tap, you can cycle it for 3 and it makes green, white, or blue.
I would probably take Spara's Headquarters here, actually.
Okay.
Like, the Tri-lands are definitely better than any of the common or, lands, but not like dramatically better in the sense that you don't cycle them all that often, to be honest. Like, but
no.
The fact that this taps for all 3 colors, you don't have to choose, like when you play a Broker's Hideout, you're like, the classic is your opening hand is Forest and a Broker's Hideout. Do I get an island or do I get a Plains? You're playing Brokers. And it's rough. And it's especially rough when you have like a green 2-drop. So you're like, I got to choose turn 1. I don't,
Yep.
Whereas, Spara's Headquarters gives you get to have it all, and it helps you cast double color spells later and all that. I think that if there was something a shade better than Echo Inspector, I would probably take that. But I think the Headquarters is a little better than Echo Inspector as things currently stand.
So is there a flexibility there? Because like, explain to me, like this is somewhat similar to taking a gold card first, right? Like if you play this Spara's Headquarters if it touches 2 of the colors, is that like the hedge that you're making that like, oh, fine, as long as it's touching at least 2 colors, I can put it in my deck?
Yeah, it is regardless of which of the 2 colors it touches, it's going to be fine. And the fact that it's all 3, I mean, it actually opens the door to a lot more than you might expect, especially since I don't think you should do it, but I have played like green-white decks splashing 2 red cards, 1 blue card. And this could enable that as well. Okay.
Yeah, I like that pick too. I think so let's see. I'm sitting here, I'm drafting. What am I taking?
You're taking Headquarters.
I think I'm taking Echo Inspector. You have talked me into Headquarters, I'll say. But I'm trying to say, like, if this was just me sitting by myself, opened up a pack, I think I would take Echo Inspector.
So here's
but that does feel like a mistake.
Reasoning as well is like Echo Inspector, I think as we probably would call it like about like a B-, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's been a solidly above average playable, but it's not like my deck's got 3 Echo Inspectors. You're never like that.
Totally.
I think that you would need something a little bit better, like a B plus level card. I think Spara's Headquarters is pretty firmly a B.
Okay.
And I don't think that you're going to lose much if your last card is instead of Echo Inspector, ends up being whatever the next like card, like a half tier down is. Mm-hmm. And like in your case, splashed Backstreet Boys. But I think that it's worth giving it up for the powerful mana fixing that the Headquarters represents, but I do think it is close. I think that taking Rafine's Informant over this, or Rafine's Silencer over this, not a good idea. I just don't think, I would not.
Yeah.
I think that's like a distant third past those 2.
Yeah. I like the upside on the Spara's Headquarters pick too. And I'll tell you, if it were you and I drafting, I would be like, yeah, you're right. Let's do that. So that'll probably change my evaluation on that a little bit. I mean, this is the best one as well. So. Okay, let's talk about the format big picture here, Luis, because like I said, before the show started, you and I were chatting and we were kind of like, well, let's save some of our bigger picture stuff for a little bit further down the road. But then we started talking about it and it was like, no, let's go ahead and get into this now. So where are you at on the format as we stand right now? We're a couple weeks in.
Well, I think I'm not very high on the format. I think this format is below average.
Do you think it sucks?
I wouldn't go that far. No. I mean, okay. I think there's room for some nuance here. Like if you ask me like, what in the last 2 years, which of the formats do I think like actively were bad? I think AFR, especially like with time to like think about it, was like, wow, that format was not good. The games were just so unbelievably boring. Like they core-setted it up.
And then they introduced complexity that didn't really have a payoff. Like there was a lot to not like there.
And I actually think, and this might sound funny, I think saying that Streets of New Capenna is below average is actually a compliment to how well they've done limited design over the past couple of years, because I think the average set's very fun. And Streets of New Capenna has a couple things, and some of them have to do with context. And let me explain that. I go into a 3-color set wanting to take the 3-color gold cards, expecting to play 3-color decks and sometimes even 4, and expecting to like have these sweet brews reminiscent of Invasion or, Shards of Alara or any of these, Cons, right? Cons was a fantastic 3-color set. And Streets of New Capenna is like, no, you got to take the 2-drop because the 2-color aggro decks are really what's going on here. And I think that is a pretty disappointing kind of like mismatch of like, if this wasn't a 3-color set, I mean, obviously it is a 3-color set, so it's kind of hard to say like what does it mean for it not to be? If this was a set without the 3-color theme and like the good decks tended to be these like 2-color aggro decks or close to 2-color aggro decks, I feel like I would have been a little less disappointed with how this played out. And then the other kind of aspect to it is when you have a set with 5 pillars, which is the 5 families here, and multiple of them are, I think, pretty meaningfully worse than the others, you lose a lot when it comes to draft archetypes. Because what this reminds me of a little, and the comparison could be Strixhaven, where in Strixhaven, I think that Lorehold was worse than it should have been, like for the format to be better. But I think Strixhaven is good because I think 3 out of the 5 colored pairs were good, and I think Witherbloom as the 4th was still good. Like it was still draftable, and you could draft sweet Witherbloom decks, and the gameplay was good. And like overall it worked, right? It's risky. This is the risk of playing like a guild set, which is where you have the 5 allied color pairs or 5 color pairs like in Strixhaven, or a 3-color set where you have the 5 shards, families, whatever. Because the natural draft format is 10 color pairs, right? The average draft format, you go into whatever random draft format, just pick one out of a hat. It's gonna kind of organically have 10 archetypes, and they usually put in the signpost uncommons for all those archetypes, etc. When you artificially cut that down to 5, and then 1 or 2 of those are misses, you're cutting down on the replayability a lot. And part of, I think, that a common complaint about Strixhaven, New Capenna, I'm not the only one to say this, but I have been feeling it, is that you end up brokers a lot of the time. And even though, yes, I do draft Maestros, I do draft Obscura, I don't really draft Riveteers or Cabaretti very much. And that just means that the format, the longevity of it is less. And that's something that impacts the people who draft a lot. We're among those people. So I don't think this format's a disaster. I don't think it sucks. I'm going to continue drafting it. I've slowed down, but I'm going to continue drafting it. I just wish there was less pressure to be like, yeah, you're supposed to take, Rafine's Informant, pick one over basically any gold card besides like the really tippity top. And that leads to me wanting to draft it fewer times overall. And I do think there's another thing here, which is Inspiring Overseer. I still don't get like why did this have to be as good as it is at common? And I think a big reason that white in particular, white, green, and white, blue are the best is the Inspiring Overseer is just so much better. Like looking at the win rate of the card, it's like better than any uncommon. It's among the top rares in the set. Having that at common is going to be destabilizing and is going to mean that, like, how often have you had like a couple non-white cards and then there's a 5th pick Inspiring Overseer? Like, I'm supposed to just take this, aren't I? Like, it just really pushes. I
have completely jumped ship on an archetype because of that. In fact, I mentioned before that I've been doing draft videos every day on the LR YouTube channel, and you can see that. Like, I think the situation you described almost exactly, by the way, where it was like 5th pick, and I'm like, well, let's see what happens over here instead, Yeah,
and like, I just think that overall.
So I wanted to ask you about the Overseer though. Before, do you think that it warps the format?
Yes, I do.
Okay,
I think
that's a big statement, right?
I mean, how do you feel when your opponent casts an Inspiring Overseer?
Behind, I guess, is how I describe it.
Yeah, when I cast it, I feel like I'm going to win, and when they cast it, I feel like I'm going to lose. And the numbers actually kind of bear that out.
They really do. You were not using hyperbole when you were just talking about it a few minutes ago. I mean, if you look it up on 17 lands, and we know that, 17 lands is useful data, but, can be flawed. It's still a decent kind of shower of what's going on here. We've never really seen anything like this, right? Like the level of cards that this is around are insane. For example, Inspiring Overseer ranks slightly ahead of Disciplined Duelist, and right behind, like one ranking point and less than a full percent, about 0.5% behind, Broker's Ascendancy.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we're talking about some extremely powerful cards here, right? And let's see, I'm going to read off the rarities until I get to another common. Okay, I'm just going to blast through this. So it's uncommon, rare, 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 uncommon, mythic, rare, uncommon, rare, mythic, rare, rare, uncommon, rare, uncommon, rare, uncommon, uncommon, mythic, rare, and then we get to Jewel Thief. I mean, that is
that was the other comment, by the way, that
and that was the other one. Yeah.
Kind of eyebrows raised. I do think Jewel Thief feels a little different because a 3/3 ground dork is a little different than a 2/1 flyer. But part of the reason is a 2/1 is such a real card, you always have to deal with it. Like when they cast Inspiring Overseer, if you have a Strangle in your hand, you usually just have to kill it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You let them hit you with a 2/1 flyer a bunch, and it drew them a card and even gained them a life, and that life point matters too.
Right. And like to illustrate the dominance of Inspiring Overseer, like this is what I'm going to show. So 2 cards here have the exact same win rate. One of them is Jewel Thief. Okay. And it's that whole list down that I just read you, lower than Inspiring Overseer. The card that Jewel Thief is tied with is Falco Spara Pact Weaver, which is the mythic Broker's,
right,
family lead or whatever. I mean, like, and again, these 2 cards are however many cards I just named, 12 or 14 or whatever cards down the list from Inspiring Overseer. How did this happen? Like, this was one of those things where I'm shocked about it because when we saw the card, we all said, okay, this is crazy. Not just us, but everybody. But I've had this happen before where that card ended up being good and not great, where the format didn't really support it. The colors trio is in wasn't great. Something about it just not being really what the format was about, where you played the card, but it wasn't like what you thought it was going to be. And this one is worse. Or I should say better. This card's performed better than we even thought it would. It fits into the format perfectly. It's in the best color. So somehow, and it's part of the reason why it's the best color, but it also is like surrounded by the other best commons in the set. And of course the card sees obscenely, I mean, one other way to look at this, and this is part of the reason why I asked you about if it warps the format, Luis, is one of the stats that you can look at is how many games that these cards were played in, right? And if I read down the list of the cards that are above it, it's like 10,000, 11,000, 21,000, 9,000, 8,000, 10,000, 21,000. And you get to Inspiring Overseer and it's 217,000.
Right.
Right? Like this card is 10 times more played than any card above it on the list. You see it all the time, right? Everybody's always playing these things. And that also, I think, is why it's so, like why you can't push commons like this, right? Because there is an emotional component to drafting and playing Magic. And what Louis said is very true. When your opponent plays it, you do get kind of a feeling like, oh crap, right? Like, man, they have an Inspiring Overseer. It must be nice. I have to really, like, things are going to have to come together for me now. And like you said, you feel like I'm just going to lose now, right? Like you have the emotional response of like, well, I'm just done. I'm not. And when I cast it, it's like, well, good game. Both teams tried hard, but I had a turn 3 Overseer. So what were you supposed to do about it? And while that probably doesn't quite play out that strongly, it does feel that way. And the numbers are backing it up as being, a massive bump to your win rate in a set where it's extremely easy to cast and in the best color. So kind of crazy that they let that one go.
It's in the best color because it's the color that has Inspiring Overseer.
That's part of it, but there is a lot of support around it. You know,
sure. I mean, Rafine's Informant has done fantastically well.
It's like, right below Jewel Thief. Informant is right there. I mean, that's two of the best 3 commons in a set where these particular commons we're talking about are outperforming many rares is really saying something. You know, that's a huge issue.
Well, part of it is when you look at the good commons, especially in like white, blue, and green. Jewel Thief, Rafine's Informant, Inspiring Overseer are all Echo Inspector, are all cards that also smooth out your draws. They have Connive, or they make a treasure, or they just draw a card. And that just makes these decks also a lot more consistent in doing their thing, especially in a format that's pretty aggressive and rewards you for being 2 colors, which means that when you splash Disciplined Duelist in your white, green, or white, blue deck, because you have Jewel Thief or Inspiring Overseer or Rafine's Informant, you're more likely to cast that card, draw it plus the mana, than when you're splashing cards in, like a red black deck trying to splash a green card. Not that there's any good green cards to splash, which is also part of the
problem. One question I have, I don't know if this factors in, but I wanted to run it by you. League play. We're playing league style on Arena exclusively. Does that affect this? Like the way that this feels and plays out, where it kind of feels like you play against brokers every time for some reason?
I don't know enough about how like the pairings work to really speculate on exactly like.
Okay. I didn't want to put you on the spot, but I mean, it does feel like if the pairings are kind of bubbling the air quote good players up against each other, because I can draft in a pod against anybody, right? But then when I play, I'm playing against people that are similar rank to me. And if I'm highly ranked, then I'm going to be playing against good players, and they get to kind of farm their pod knowing the good cards and knowing to, if you see the 5th pick Overseer that you might just want to jump ship anyway. Right. And then I'm going to end up playing against them all the time. And there's not going to be a whole lot of people who ended up with the one Riveteers deck in the pod, doing that because the players that are at the higher level don't draft those decks. So anyway, that's just a potential thing. Another one, though, is that it is interesting because I think that the designers get punished disproportionately in these sets for the reason that you said before, that they really only have like kind of 5 shots to stick the landing, but also in that they have natural roadblocks that get put into place here. And it comes up quite often. And I don't know what you're supposed to do as a designer, if you're supposed to try to alleviate them or not. What I'm talking about is when you go for 2 colors, and let's say you're pretty solidified in 2 colors, and then you open up a really sweet card that you really want to play in a 3rd color, but it's not one of the supported shards, right? Or families or whatever. And now you're like, well, I don't want to be Sultai here, right? Like I'm blue-black, right? And I opened a green card I really want to play, but I can't, it feels like I'm making a mistake to go down that path because the fixing is going to be awkward. I'm going to have no triple gold cards, of which there's a ton of in the set to support me. I could probably make the mana work, like on some level, I can just cobble together tri-lands that act as dual lands and make the deck work. But it does feel like you're swimming upstream once that happens. And that's kind of limiting, right? Like that feels not great in the draft when it's like, I want to kind of let my imagination go, or I want to try a new archetype, but you don't really feel like the format actually supports it.
Yeah. I mean, it is true. Like you end up, your options are constrained. And I think that's part of what makes Magic sets interesting, right?
Yeah.
The gimmick for this set is that there's 3 color combinations. The gimmick for that set is, that there's these 5 guilds. The gimmick for this other set is something else. But it does, one of the safety valves is that when there's 10 archetypes and 3 myths, that's just an average format. That feels good. It's fine. You're not supposed to draft white, red, or whatever. And like, or like blue, green. But and specifically some of the archetypes like to come together less frequently. How often does blue white not come together? It almost always is good because those themes complement each other naturally. Whereas like green blue can be a little rougher. But when you've constrained yourself to 5 different combinations, then yeah, you're going to have more misses. You're going to give people fewer options when it comes to like in Strixhaven. You had fewer options when you were already lore hold and you opened a black card. Well, white, black, red was a little harder to run than
with blue.
Than for example, whatever the 3 colors that would have, or white, blue, red, for example. White, blue, red would have 2 of the 3 pairs instead of 1 of the 3. So
exactly
that is part of it. And overall, the way I see this format is it's a format where 2 color aggro decks or 2 in a splash are the best thing to be doing, and that you should, the brokers combinations are above the rest, with Maestro's not super far behind.
Yeah. One fundamental thing about the set that I wanted to touch on is the way that you and I view the archetypes is not how I would have predicted that we viewed them going in. And I don't mean by ranking them, but I mean, when you and I talk about this format, we categorize them as color pairs with a splash rather than full 3 color decks, right? So that's different, right? Because, the fixing and stuff supports full 3 color decks. But when I'm drafting, I'm thinking about what color pair am I going to be in? And then maybe there's a few cards worth splashing off of that.
Yeah. And I think that's part of what I think is a little disappointing to me is I would have preferred there to be more 3. I would have rather that the decks be more 3 colors and that more of the 3 color pairs were actually good.
so why aren't there? Things. I mean, why don't you just draft full 3 color decks? The fixing's there.
It's not though. It's not actually there. And the reason is you're not going to win the game if on turn 2 you're using your exile, your Spara's adjudicators instead of playing a 2-drop when your opponent's playing a 2-drop.
Right. So I would say that the fixing is there, but that you're just not incentivized to do that over just play 2 colors with it, maybe a little splash.
Sure. You can put it either way you want. The fixing isn't good enough for what the format actually is to play 3 colors.
Is that true? I guess I think it's a meaningful distinction, I guess. Like what we're really saying is there's something better to do. I mean, you're saying that's the same thing.
Right. What it boils down to is when you say that fixing is good enough, well, what does good enough mean? Yes, it can get you to 3 colors, but not in time, so therefore it's not good enough.
Right. So what I'm saying is that it can, like in a vacuum, the fixing can get you to the 3 colors that you need in a reasonable time frame for limited, say by turn 4 or 5.
Right.
Right. Which is kind of a feat. There's a lot of decks where that's not true. But what we're really saying is, but if you go down this other path, you could just kill your opponent by that time. So do that.
It's not even that. It's also if you go down the fixing path and they go down the beatdown path, you're the one who's going to get whammied. So, totally.
So therefore, it's not good enough because it doesn't hold up to the format. I just don't think
it's that useful to look at it without context. I agree this is good fixing. If we like reading the cards coming into the set, we're like, wow, the fixing's pretty good.
Yeah.
When you play out the set, it's like, oh, but not good enough.
Right, because you'll get killed.
You're just going to lose to the person who plays Body Dropper, into Plasma Jockey or Rafine's Informant into, really any 3-drop at that point. Inspiring Overseer is obviously the best.
So when it comes to splashing, how are you approaching that? Why are some of the families better or worse at it, or incentivized you more or less? And how often are you just straight up 2 colors, like actually no splash, just 2 colors?
I'm not that frequently straight 2 colors with literally no splash.
Yeah.
But there's a couple things that kind of go into it. One is that, as I mentioned before, the colors that have a lot of like connive or just other cards are like Inspiring Overseer end up having a little easier time for it, right? If you have 5 connive cards, then drawing your off-color card is less punishing because you can discard it and you see your off-color land plus the fixing, or off-color card plus the fixing more frequently. The other is what cards are worth splashing. Like if you look, like I mentioned it a bunch, but Broker's Charm, Disciplined Duelist, Lagrella, these are cards I splash in any of the 2 color pairs that I'm close to. Broker's Charm less than the other 2, but they're still really good. Like I'm happy to be blue-white splash and discipline duelist or white-green splash and discipline duelist. The card is nuts. It's just unbelievably good.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you look at like the Riveteers card and you want the 4/2 haste that has indestructible for a turn. Like that card's arguably not even that good if it just costs 3 mana and you could cast it every time.
If it was just 2 in a red, it's like medium. Yeah.
Right. So that the card quality matters, and so does the ease of splashing. And as a result, I do think that it's unfortunate because I think red green with treasures would have been in the prime position to splash, but there's just not the splashable options in white and black when you're like red green base are just not as exciting. I do like Brazen Upstart. Yeah, that one's good. But a lot of the cards, like the charms, are the whole charm cycle is just okay. Like I'm not excited about having any of the charms in my deck.
Right.
Like I said, the crew captain is a pretty unimpressive, uncommon, and even when you go to rares, like compare hostile takeover. I'm splashing that one whenever I can. A broker's ascendancy, but then you look at all the other ascendancies and they're just whatever. You look at things like Ginny Fey or Incandescent Aria, which are just like okay, but they're not cards I'm losing my mind over. So I would say generally, like, if you can be 2 colors with no splash, you're actually pretty happy about that because you end up your mana is just great, right? You end up playing also 16 lands a little more often because you just don't have to worry about your total land count. And then if you're playing a little more of a controlling role, I don't mind splashing. This is why Maestros ends up being 3 colors a little more often than kind of some of the other comparisons, because when your deck has Corrupt Courtificial, Strangle, Murder, Raffined Silencer, and Snooping Newsy, and you're just like, I'm going to block and I'm going to kill your stuff. You have time to play your Glamorous Outlaw and to play your 3rd color, and you don't mind doing all that. When you're trying to attack your opponent, like red-black specifically, like when I'm the red-black sack deck, which is actually the deck we're going to talk about today, I don't want to splash that often because I just want to get my opponent dead. I also don't want to this deck doesn't have that much card filtering. You draw cards off Blitz, I suppose, but you're not really like seeing tons of cards. You're not playing card draw that often. Demons Do is like not the sort of thing I'm looking for that often.
Right.
And overall, I would say if you can be a straight 2-color pair and you get enough cards and you're not making huge power level sacrifices, that's the place to be. Like when you're sitting there on like, all right, I'm playing 8 mountains, 7 swamps and 1 railway station, the red-black common tap land, and then like a bunch of red-black cards. I'm usually like, yeah, this is it. Or I have 2 Skybridge Towers, 7 plains, 7 islands. I'm playing white-blue. Things are great. The next step up is when you're like white-blue splashing, a Broker's Ascendancy and like 1 other green card or 2 other green cards. You have 3 green cards total, Lagrella the Magpie or whatever. The thing that I don't do very often is the deck that's trying to put Echo Inspector, Inspiring Overseer, and Jewel Thief in the same deck. Because at that point you're like, well, how many lands do you have? Did you really get 7 blue, white, green lands? Can you afford all these tap lands? Are you really trying to play 2 drops of 3 different colors? Because that's generally not a good idea, And
right.
And like I mentioned before, like spending turn 2. Whenever my opponent spends turn 2 to exile one of those fixers, I like Pump the Fist because I probably played a 2-drop because I take those really highly.
Yeah, and you're prioritizing that type. Yeah.
And how often do you win as a result when your opponent's like, oh, my plan is to play Glittermonger and get my 4th color? It's like just not what this is all about. So I would generally say that unless you've got a good controlling deck, which Maestros is the best situated to do that, you're usually going to be 2 in a splash or straight 2, and usually that does not mean you're red green. I think is probably the worst of the combinations when it comes to the 2-color allied pairs, because the enemy pairs, I drafted black white ones because just there's tons of black and white cards, and I just somehow managed to be black white. But you're really not going to draft off-brand allied color pairs very often.
Yeah, and you do want to keep that option open for that really powerful splash that doesn't really cost you that much. Okay, you mentioned it, and I think that this is somewhat telling of what we've been talking about today. We're going to talk about an archetype here, but it's Rakdos Sacrifice, which that's not what this set's about, right? This set is about color trios, and we're going to talk about a color pair. But the context that we're going to do it in is what Luis just described, where the base of the deck is a red-black sacrifice deck, but you can absolutely feel free to reach out into blue, I guess, into green, although I don't find myself doing that.
I mean, if you have exactly Zeator the Incinerator or Zeator's Envoy, you can play some green cards. But other than that, you really just shouldn't,
Yeah, you really shouldn't. So let's talk about it. What's the kind of fundamental approach for this deck? I mean, it's called Sacrifice deck. Is it just one of those standard issue archetypes where you're trying to sack stuff?
I mean, kind of, yeah. Like if I told you this is red black sack, like like you've drafted in many sets before, that would basically be right. It's an aggressive deck. Blitz is really nice because Blitz not only plays into aggression because you get a bunch of haste creatures with attack triggers usually, but also when those creatures die, you draw a card, so they're the perfect thing to sacrifice. When you blitz a plasma jockey, get in for 7 damage, and then sack it post combat to Fatal Grudge, like you're doing something there. Like that's good.
Yeah, and it has this nice baseline plan as well, where Blitz is just a good mechanic. Like I'm really impressed by Blitz. Yeah, like it seems so simple. It feels like they've done variants on this type of mechanic a lot of times before, but this one just hits perfect. It's aggressive, it's tempo negative, but you do get your card back, and they can really play with the cost to make it interesting with the attack triggers. And I really think they stuck the landing on Blitz, and it makes for very, very interesting games.
Yeah, I like Blitz. I think it does play out well, and I think it is leads to interesting decisions. I will say, and this is a little pro tip, I've noticed playing on Arena, my opponents blitz like at a higher rate than I think they should.
I have people that blitz every single, like they don't even see the regular cost.
Like turn 2, you cast your Mayhem Patrol. Don't cycle a shock on your opponent. Like that's crazy. And I've had that happen like 5 times against me.
Me too.
Like that's not how you should play the game. So the way you kind of get into this deck is basically if red and black cards are open, the theme is pretty strong. I like it. I mean, I'm a fan of this deck being in a limited format. I think it has a lot of interesting gameplay, a lot of interesting drafting decisions, and I like where it's at. So the way I'll get into this deck is like I first pick like a Strangle or something like that, or Rafine Silencer, and then get a Corrupt Court Official, and then at that point, like, I saw a 4th pick Forge Boss. Okay, I'll try to do this thing.
Okay.
It's not like you don't have to commit too much because most of the cards in this deck are pretty good. Like the most narrow is like the uncommon Threaten, right? Involuntary Employment. Like, yes, I'm not snapping that one off first, but I've taken that 5th pick when I've got 2 red, 2 black cards and been like, yep, fantastic. So basically, if you see red and black are open, this is a good place to be. I tend to try to avoid splashing, but if I do splashing blue can sometimes work out. There's some casualty cards in blue, which isn't like I've splashed Rooftop Nuisance in this deck if I have like a Threaten or 2 or a bunch of fodder. Like when you're when you've got 2 Corrupt Court Officials and an Unlucky Witness and a bunch of Blitz cards, 3 mana tap 2 creatures, draw 2 cards is a card that I'm pretty happy about.
Very powerful. Yeah, it really is.
And Glamorous Outlaw is actually just the power level of that card specifically is very high. So blue is a little more appealing, whereas Masked Bandits, the red, black, green one, the Riveteers one, not really anything to write home about. The key commons, Girder Goons is probably the best overall common for this deck. It's such a good card. It plays to the theme. The Blitz cards automatically trigger sacrifice triggers like Body Dropper and Forge Boss, even if you don't do anything, because they just sack end of turn. And if your opponent wants to kill them in combat, then you got a nice clean 2-for-1, or in the case of Goons, a 3-for-1, because you get a 2/2. And Goons also just gives you multiple creatures.
It does, yeah. I'm much more likely to blitz a Girder Goons than some of the other stuff. If I don't have anything else on turn 4 and there's one in my hand, that thing is getting blitzed. Like the amount of damage comes in is significant with 4. It almost always presents itself as an easy 4 damage or a chump block from the opponent, either of which you're good. And then, like you mentioned, you get the card and the body back. So it keeps the fuel going.
The removal spells are fine. I will kind of caution you against going too deep on especially the black removal. Near the beginning of the format, I did this. I've seen other people do this on Twitter or what have you. Like, I've got 4 murders. My deck's the nuts. And it's like, nah, murder's just not that good in this format. Like Strangle is good. You don't want 5 Strangles because they have diminishing returns. But when I have 2 Strangles, I'm pretty happy because that's setting up a really good turn 3 or 4. But don't be like, I'm just going to take all the murders and whacks and deal gone bads and Strangles I see, because you'll end up with too much removal, and it's just not the thing you want to be doing. You actually want a lot of creatures in this deck for the synergy purposes. So
yes, the thing that it's interesting to try to categorize Murder in the set because it is still excellent at what it's doing. It's just what it's doing is not in particular high demand in a red-black deck. There's a lot of removal in these two colors, and B, it's not that efficient. Double mana spells. It's really hard to double spell off of a Murder. You can do it really easily off of a Strangle. It can be hard to cast a Murder. It can sometimes just hard to put the dang thing on the stack. Yeah. So it's not that Murder's a bad card. It's just that isn't the priority. So yes, pick up a Murder or two. You play them. You do need to kill their creatures still, but there's a lot of ways to do that in this color pair.
The sack fodder is really good besides the Blitz creatures, which are great, like Plasma Jockey and Mayhem Patrol are fantastic. You really do want Corrupt Court Official at common, and even Exhibition Magician can be pretty good. Mm-hmm. And then at an uncommon, Unlucky Witness. Like these are all like the cards that when you sack a Corrupt Court Official to dig up the body, like you're doing the thing. And dig up the body and light him up are some pretty good ways to use these fodder. Light him up is a little more awkward because you have to sack a 2-power creature. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, Body Dropper is at its best here. The card itself, I think, doesn't have a fantastic win rate, but I imagine, and I haven't really dug in super deep, this is just my theory, I imagine that 3-color decks with Body Dropper aren't very good. Whenever I see an opponent who has a Forests and Body Dropper in their deck, I'm just like, wow, this is not, the way you want to approach it. It's excellent in these straight red-black decks. It's just a big threat, and then the Menace can really come in handy, and it passively gains counters when just your other things just, kind of naturally do their thing.
That's what I was going to say, is that Body Dropper didn't quite play out exactly how it looked on the surface. The activated ability is actually very clunky and expensive. You have to pay black, red, and sacrifice another creature. So it's pretty constricting and mana intensive to do it. And all it does is get Menace. But that's because it's separated out from the main ability, which is whenever you sacrifice another creature, it gets a counter. And that happens all the time. And that's the key, right? Is a Body Dropper just sits there and passively picks up counters. I almost never actually activate the ability unless I'm about to kill my opponent. It just doesn't come up that often that you have the extra red-black mana even after doing like a Blitz creature or something like that. Hey, if that happens, great. You've got 6 mana and this is what you're going to do with your turn. Go for it. But Body Dropper is weird because it doesn't quite fit exactly how you'd want. Like, for example, you play a Blitz creature and you're like, okay, now I want my Body Dropper to be bigger and have Menace, but I can't do that and also attack with the Blitz creature, so I have to choose one or the other. So there's all these like slight misses, but all that really matters is that it costs 2 mana and gets counters whenever you sacrifice another creature, and that happens naturally because of Blitz and other stuff. So it becomes really important.
One common that it's actually really good in this deck is Fake Your Own Death. They give a creature +2/+0, and when it dies, it comes back. Like casting it on a Blitz creature does the thing you want. Casting it on a Corrupt Court Officials can be a pretty savage play. Yeah. And even on Body Dropper, it can be pretty nice just because that's a key thing to keep in play. So this card is also just a card that's just, I think, a little underrated overall. Like it wins a lot, and I don't think people consider a premium common, that it's actually getting pretty close to that, especially if you're in this deck. Look, I understand I'm not really preaching to the right audience because you have 7 creatures in your Maestro's deck, so of course you're not going to put this card in, but it's a good card. You should take it if you're in red-black.
Well, but it is a little clunky, so that's somewhat appealing.
That's true. Right? That's true. That part's appealing, I'm sure. There's a lot of good uncommons. This is part of the reason that this deck, I think it really came through in this set, is like Forge Boss is great. It's the 3/4 for 4 that basically pings them for 2 a turn. It's really easy.
It does add up.
It's the kind of card they play it. You're at 10. You're like, I got to kill that. Like you feel the pressure.
Definitely.
Involuntary Employment, the threat that gives you a treasure. So it just kind of does it all. Really nice. And then there's like Grisly Sigil and Fatal Grudge as like sack spells. And what's cool about both these is they're pretty cheap. So you can really set up some nice plays. Nightclubber is just a fantastic card. So it's not even really specific to this deck. The cards with Blitz are good in this deck. Mm-hmm. I mentioned Unlucky Witness as a really nice sack fodder piece. Pugnacious Pugilist, the 4/4 Blitz that makes a devil when it attacks. Really good at giving you multiple bodies. Also just a big bruiser and quite strong overall. And then Pyrosludge Arsonist you can get pretty late. This is the 2/2. You pay 1, tap it. Deals X to them or X the number of permanents you sacrificed. It includes lands. It includes treasures. So it actually adds up a little bit more than you might think.
And it goes anywhere, right? You can ping anything.
And it can go to any target. Like it's quite a strong card. So,
but only in this archetype, like you said. So therefore you can pick it up later because nobody else wants it.
Technically, you could play this in Red Green Treasures, but again, that deck sucks so much that I haven't really seen that come together.
That's weird. I forgot that was even a thing.
Yes.
But it is.
And then there's also some nice rares. I mean, obviously, Ob Nicholas is great in this deck. For blue, you splashing Maestro's Diabolist or Hostile Takeover. For green, Ziatora and the Envoy, and then a Body Launderer. All great options. But basically, the reason I think this deck is good is it's a good 2-color aggressive deck that's supported at common, uncommon, and even rare. It's kind of got all the pieces. It's funny because there's no threaten at common. But I think that this deck would actually be too much if Involuntary Employment was common. They did a good decision to have that be an uncommon.
You feel the same way? Because one other missing piece here is, some variant on, 1 in a black, sack a creature, draw 2 cards or whatever.
Yeah, but
is that just too easy? Because
also, I think with the Blitz just kind creatures, you're drawing enough extra cards already.
Yeah.
There is Rob the Archives, the red one that lets you kind of like exile the top 2 cards, play them this turn with Casualty 1. That card's just a little too awkward. Like, I have played it, and sometimes it's okay, but it kind of costs 6 or 7 mana effectively to get the full value from it.
This would be the deck for it, though, right? Because I always see it when I'm drafting clunky Maestros, and I'm like, I got much better card draw options than that. Yeah.
Look, a low curve proactive deck that wants to sack things and has sack fodder, I think you can play 1 copy of that card if you've got nothing better to do, and it can be okay.
Okay. Yeah, this deck has been powerful. I think I've never had the straight red-black version, but I've definitely had it where it touched blue, maybe even touched green, probably ill-advised. But it's powerful. And the thing that stands out to me about it the most is that it sits in that place that you and I love, Luis, where it has a solid game plan, but with upside. Right, like just playing Blitz creatures and just playing out the way that this deck just plays out is totally fine, and you can absolutely just win games with it. But then if you do put together some of your extra combos where like you draw 2 body droppers or something, and you're like, okay, now they're 4/4s, or if you do draw your 1 copy of employment, what is it called again?
Involuntary
employment, right? Then all of a sudden the deck can become like this kind of blowout scenario. And that's what I like. I like solid fundamental baseline with a really high upside. And you don't get that often. A lot of times you have to do this crazy setup cost where you have to put in all these cards that kind of work just perfectly together. But if the house of cards falls apart, then you're kind of left with not really a good game plan. And this doesn't follow that. So definitely check it out. And don't be afraid to reach out a little bit for a splash, but you really don't need to. If you can get the red-black version, that's probably going to serve you very, very well. Okay, Luis, let's call it a show there. I want to say thanks to everybody for listening. Make sure you check out our sponsors channel, fireball.com and FTX. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. And that's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week.
So the Channel Fireball Twitter account asked an interesting question the other day, which is what are the top 4 Magic sets of all time? And
oh God.
So me, TBS, and Zach Hill, all of whom have worked in game design, Zach, in fact, on Magic specifically, agree on 3 of the 4. And I want to see if you
really?
Can you guess them?
I did not see this.
Good.
There's only one that I know for sure. And it's because I've talked to Zach about it and I've talked to you guys, and it's alpha. Like you guys are all
obviously that's number 1.
100% alpha. I really don't know after that. I'm just thinking in terms of limited, so it's not really right. I don't know. That's the only one that I'm sure of.
Well, I know that there was one that you were definitely not going to get.
Okay.
And that's M10. And
no, I would not have gotten that. I can see it though.
Yeah, and so the reason that I have M10 as such a fundamental set is M10 was kind of like a love letter to alpha. It was a reboot of core sets where it was like one of the first really exciting core sets in many years. Because core sets were kind of like the dumping ground for a long time, right?
They were
like,
all reprints or something, right?
First of all, there were some that were literally all reprints. They were like the low watermark for like art, like if you looked at like 5th through 7th edition, like
right.
9th edition, like no one got excited about them. They were whiteboarded for a long time. And M10 had things like Gin of the Lamp and the Lich and just all these like really fundamentally cool concepts, and it really just did a fantastic job of
really resonated.
Of really giving just all these resonance a great word, resonant kind of intuitive designs that were like, this is what Magic's about. And I still think it's actually one of the best sets of all time.
So where do you go from there? That makes sense to me. I wouldn't have got that, like you said. Is there another old set that like mattered? Like, cause we know that like you're a big fan of, like Arabian Nights and like a lot of the old sets, but what would separate one out? So
I think Alpha, first of all, if you listen to me, you and TBS talk on our like old set reviews, the quality of old sets did vary wildly. Like I think Arabian Nights is a masterpiece. I think Legends, Antiquities, Homelands, Ice Age, they're all actually kind of bad. Like they had these, ups and downs, but overall not great. I think that so to go back to the list that we agreed on, Zach had Ravnica, which we both had on our list, original Ravnica.
Oh, okay.
Because I thought that was just a really high quality set. Yeah. The guild set was really cool. Like, like that whole thing of like, the 2-color guilds were like so like they really defined 2-color pairs in such a cool way. Like we still use Rakdos, right?
I was going to say, like, not only that, but that set feels like the archetype for the sets we have now, right? Like gold,
and I think that's actually
level
really
of
important.
Complexity and all that stuff. Yeah.
And then like the Shocklands, right? Like Watery Grave Stomping Ground, like that, those were like,
okay,
a really good design and really have been reprinted a bunch of times as a result. We've gone back to Ravnica a bunch of times.
It was also a revered limited set.
Yeah. And then, so from then it gets a little shakier. So I had Invasion, and part of the reason I had Invasion was it was one of the again, it goes back to like, it was a gold set that was like a beacon after the dreary power level and terrible gameplay that was Mercadian Masks, which was a reaction to the broken gameplay that was the Urza set. And Invasion is so cool, and the way they did gold cards was so cool, and all the cards were awesome. Zach had Innistrad, which I actually think is a great, like the flavor of Innistrad was fantastic. The gameplay also very good in that set. Really did a good job of showing how important the world was while also introducing a new world. And that's one thing that Ravnica and Innistrad both did, which was like, here's a new world and it's awesome. And like the gothic horror feel of Innistrad, I think, was just through the roof. And then TBS had an interesting one in his last slot, which was Mirage. And Mirage is an old set.
Oh.
But the reason, and I'm really excited to get to Mirage, by the way, when we're getting close.
We're getting there, yeah.
Yeah, when we do our reviews, is Mirage was the first set designed for Limited. Like,
go TBS.
You should appreciate that. It was literally the first set designed to be drafted. Like, people drafted sets before that, but they were bad. Like, really bad. Mirage was, like, revolutionary. So I actually would like to change my answer, probably from Invasion to Mirage. Like,
awesome.
I think if in the top 10, I would put both, but I think that TBS is right. And Mirage was like a watershed moment of like, let's design Magic sets to be draftable because a lot of people like doing this and we can show people how fun this is. And well, let's just say Mirage is part of the reason that me and you are here 23 years later or whatever, talking, or 24 years later, I don't know, talking about Limited.